Hello, it's the week number 10 for first grade music for distance learning, and I'm going to tell you a story today, and you need to kind of use your imagination today. This story is a fiction story. If you've ever heard what the word fiction means, maybe Mrs. Esselman has been talking about that, or Mrs. Steeler last year talked about that. Fiction means that it's probably not true. Nonfiction is the opposite. Nonfiction means that it's a story that probably is about a real person that really did happen to a story that happened to that person. It's a true story. Fiction means it is not true. And I know, I'm pretty darn sure that this is a fiction story today, but you have to kind of use your imagination. And I need to tell you, this is actually a music story, but I want you to use your imagination. And this is a story about a little boy. And I don't want you to make fun of him because he looks a little bit different than you and me. But this little boy looks like this. And I'm going to write his name. His name is Middle C. I'm going to write his name right here so we remember who he is. Middle C. And Middle C was a little boy who needed to find a new place to live. And I'm not sure why. I don't know why he needed to find a new place to live, but he had to run around and walk around town and figure out where he was going to decide to live. And I'm so sorry, it's kind of hard. There you go. What he was going to decide to live. And so he was walking around town and checking different neighborhoods out. This is so opposite. It's kind of weird. Okay, here you go. Middle C was looking around town looking for a new place to live. And he turned a corner and he saw a street. And this was a street. And this was one side of the street. And this was another side of the street. And I'm going to write something else down. This is called a staff. We need to use our imagination a little bit now. He was walking around and he turned a corner and he saw this side of the street and he saw this block and he said, this looks like a really good place to live. I think I'm going to try and figure out what's going on around here because this looks like a really nice place. I just might want to live here. And so he walked to this side of the street. This is one side of the street. Here's the middle of the street. Here's the other side of the street. He's on a block. He walked over to this side of the street and he knocked on the door. And he heard someone at the door and he said, just a minute, I'll be right there. Hang on, I'll be right there. Just a minute, I'm coming. And someone opened up the door. And this woman opened the door and she said, hello, hello, can I help you? And, oh, where's my middle C? What did I do with him? I lost him. I lost my middle C. Oh, here he is. My middle C said, hello, my name is Middle C, and I need to find a new place to live, and I'm trying to figure out, this looks like a really nice block. Can you tell me some information about your block? And she said, oh, I would love to tell you some information about my block. This is my side of the street, and we would love to have you come and live on our side of the street. My name is Mrs. Trebleclef, and I'm going to write that down so you remember. I'm going to put it over here. There's more room over here. Can you figure out so far that this probably isn't a nonfiction story? I think it's fiction. I think it's just made up. Mrs. Trebleclef was talking to Middle C, and Middle C said, your neighborhood looks really nice. Your side of the street looks good. And she said, we would love to have you come and live on my side of the street, but there's just one rule. There's lots of kids that live on my side of the street. They're just not here right now, but there's just one rule. If you're going to live on my side of the street, you have to have a high voice. Does it sound like Mrs. Trebleclef has a high voice? Every time she talks, she kind of talks like this. And we'd love to have Middle C come and live on our side of the street, but the one rule is you have to have a high voice. And Middle C said, okay, thank you very much. That's really interesting. I'm going to think about that. That sounds very fun. I just may be back. She said, okay, bye, Middle C. See you later. Hope you come back and decide to live on our side of the street. And he thought that was a really nice lady. She was really nice, but that one rule about a high voice, I don't know if I can do that. So he walked to the other side of the street and he knocked on the door to see who was on this side of the street, who lived on this side of the street. He heard clump, 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 clump. Hello, I'm coming. And he heard somebody coming, clump, 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 and somebody answered the door. And this is the person who answered the door, and his name is Mr. Bassclef. And Mr. Bassclef answered the door, and Middle C was trying to get some information. He said, hello, can I help you? And Middle C said, hi, my name is Middle C, and I'm trying to find a new place to live. And this looks like a really nice block over here. And I was just across the street talking to a lady named Mrs. Trebleclef. And I'd like to get some information about your side of the street to see if maybe I want to live on your side of the street. He said, oh, we'd love to have you come and live on our side of the street. We've got lots of kids that live on our side of the street. They're just not here right now. But you can certainly come here. My name is Mr. Bassclef. But there's one rule. We'd love to have you live on our side of the street, but there's just one rule. If you live on our side of the street, you have to have a low voice. Does Mr. Bassclef have a low voice? I think he does. He's got a very low voice, and that's the rule for his side of the street. Mrs. Trebleclef had a rule, and if you wanted to live on her side of the street, you had to have a high voice. Mr. Bassclef has a rule. If you want to live on his side of the street, you have to have a low voice. So Miss Middle C was kind of looking at all this stuff, and he thought, well, thank you very much. And everybody was really nice. I'll have to think about that. And he said, hope you come back. You're welcome to live on our side of the street anytime, but remember that one rule. So Middle C had a decision to make. He loved this block. This was going to be a really fun place. He knew that he wanted to live here because it looked like there were lots of kids here, even though they weren't there right then. But everybody was really nice. Mrs. Trebleclef was really nice on her side of the street. Mr. Bassclef was really nice on his side of the street. But he had to think about it, and he thought about all those rules. If he was going to live on Mrs. Trebleclef's side of the street, he'd have to have a high voice. And he really did it. He did have a very high voice. And Mr. Bassclef said that if he was going to live on his side of the street, he'd have to have a low voice. And Middle C really didn't have a low voice. This is Middle C's voice. It's kind of high, but not really, and kind of low, but not really. And so he made a decision that he wanted to be friends with both of them. And so he decided to live in the middle of the street. And so he could be friends with people on Mrs. Trebleclef's side of the street and friends with Mr. Bassclef's side of the street. And so Middle C didn't really, he really couldn't be over here. He couldn't be over here. And there must not have been any cars in his neighborhood. And so it was okay that he lived in the middle of the street. And so that is the story of Middle C. And Middle C looks different than a lot of the other notes because Middle C is a circle, like a lot of notes, but has a little line all the way through it. And just kind of like the piano. And I want to show you, I'm going to walk over here for a minute. This is don't get dizzy because I'm walking over here. But I know you have a piano at your house. And on the piano, there's all kinds of keys. If you can see all the keys on the piano. Whoa, I'm trying to make this so you can see better. Okay, you can see all kinds of keys on the piano. And Mrs. Trebleclef is way over here. This is Mrs. Trebleclef's side of the piano because this is her side of the street because they have to have a high voice. And all of these notes have a high voice, okay? Down here, this is Mr. Bassclef's side of the street of the piano, his side of the street, because everybody down here has the rule where they have to have a low voice. Mrs. Trebleclef, Mr. Bassclef. Low voice for Mr. Bassclef, high voice for Mrs. Trebleclef. And Middle C decided that because he really didn't have a very high voice or a low voice, Middle C, it was okay for him to live in the middle of the street. So he could be friends with Mrs. Trebleclef's neighborhood. He could be friends with Mr. Bassclef's neighborhood. And so there's a spot in the middle of the piano that's Middle C, where he decided to live And that worked out really well for him because he could be friends with everybody. But he didn't really fit the rule of having a super high voice, and he didn't really fit the rule of having a super low voice. So this is the story of Middle C and Mrs. Treble-Clef and Mr. Bass-Clef. And I'm going to send you a worksheet where you can practice drawing them. And I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to remove Middle C, move her over here, our story. Remember, when you're drawing Middle C, where's my marker? Here we go. When you're drawing Middle C, it's just like this. It's a circle. It's kind of an oval, kind of a circular. It looks like a circle, but it's an oval. Little turn, kind of like somebody sat on it and squished it a little bit, and there's a little line going right through it. So that is Middle C. Just like that, make a little circle. It's kind of flat, a little bit. That's Middle C. Here's Middle C, a whole bunch of Middle Cs. That's what they look like. The staff that we talked about is this part right here. And these are the sides of the street that Middle C was living on and Mr. Bass-Clef was living on. And something about your body helps you remember a staff. If you take your hand and you turn your hand sideways like this. I have 5 fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers. Those are like the lines of a staff. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's always 5 lines. And if my hand is sideways, it's just like that. The spaces, there are 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's just the little empty spots between those lines. There are 4 of those. If my hand is sideways, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. My spaces are 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So if you're ever trying to draw a staff and you're trying to remember, I can't remember, are there 8 lines? Are there 4 lines? Are there 7 lines? Think about your hand, turn it sideways, 5 lines and 4 spaces right in between there. If you turn your hand sideways, it shows you how to do it. And this is how I draw a staff. I draw a rectangle. I make a rectangle just like this. I put 1 line in the middle. And then I just put another line between there and another line between there. And the top line and the bottom line, I count them all. I start at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. And remember, the spaces are just the empty spots between the lines. Here's space number 1, space number 2, space number 3, space number 4. 5 lines and 4 spaces. Okay, that's how I draw my staff. My treble clef is a little more interesting. This is how I draw my treble clef. I start with a straight line, which for some reason wasn't very straight. Let me do that again. We're going to learn how to draw our symbols today. Music's a straight line, okay? The next thing I do, there's my straight line. I make a little half circle just like that. So it almost looks like a P. All right. Then I'm just going to show you, here's my line, here's my half circle. Then I'm going to start at the little bottom part of my half circle and curl around just like that. And that turns into Mrs. Treble-Clef. Mr. Bass-Clef, we're learning a lot today. Mr. Bass-Clef, I start with a dot, just like that, wherever you want. And it kind of looks like a backwards C. I'm writing my letters of the alphabet like A, B, C. This is what C looks like. I'm going to go backwards, kind of like a backwards C. I put my big dot there. I make a big backwards C, almost like a half of a heart. And then you have to have 2 little dots there. I'm going to send you a worksheet where you can practice drawing these musical symbols, and then you can send it back to me, okay? So that's the story of Mrs. Treble-Clef and Mr. Bass-Clef and Middle C, and how he decided to find a new neighborhood to live in. And that's going to help you with all of your stuff with music for the rest of your life. It's a very important story to remember.